1 week season.
OWS fam, La Familia, welcome to the inaugural DFS Labs FanDuel edition. I am Mike Johnson, your host, mjohnson86, as I am known in the DFS and best ball streets. Excited for week one, the start of the NFL season. We're about 1,200 best ball drafts. That's an exaggeration, but I'm ready for the real thing now and getting into the real DFS, the real NFL football. All of our takes are going to be confirmed or denied in the first week. We know that, whatever you believe, if it is confirmed by what you see on the field, then you were right. And that's all there is to it. I kid, obviously. But we are here. This is, again, the first DFS Labs FanDuel edition. JM has been killing it since last year, building lineups on DraftKings, going through his thought process, with his guest. And we are going to expand this year. I have courses on 1 week season that we talk about, the edge on FanDuel. There's lots of different things that we'll get into this season, why I think there's edge to be exploited. There's a high expected value to playing on FanDuel. And with that, I am going to introduce you to our esteemed guest, Steve Kleisath. Steve, a 1 week season member, inner circle member. He is known in the Discord streets as Maximus. So Maximus, Big Max, FanDuel Master, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Pleasure and honor. Look forward to extending what JM and his cousin did last year into the FanDuel world. And it should be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this is one of the first times we've spoken face to face, I guess virtually like this, but a lot of interactions last year on Discord. Really enjoyed our back and forth discussing the nuance of the slate, how to adjust things from a FanDuel perspective, just because so much of what everyone does is, it starts and is centered around DraftKings, and then people make slight adjustments. There's very few who really focus on that specific, the nature of the FanDuel scoring, the nature of the salary structure, and all those things. So really excited with that. So we've had you build a lineup. First, do you want to share with the people, I guess, and I'll pull up on my screen, what is the contest, a little bit about your background with FanDuel and the contest specifically that we built for?
Sure. Yeah, this is a contest I had a good deal of success with last season, as fate would have it. There's always the variance train that goes with the skill and the instinct, of course. But in a non-shameless promotion, because I'm the one that's talking about it, guys, you got to get Mike Johnson's FanDuel course for NFL DFS. It was absolutely pivotal in some of my decisions, just based on the way to approach roster construction on FanDuel specifically, which is obviously different from DraftKings. And just historically, I've just had a better go at it, I guess, with FanDuel, with NFL. I do play on DraftKings as well, but with FanDuel, it's, there's certain thought processes that are kind of more cut and dry when you have a process, as far as what the position is and what you're kind of looking for on the face of it. And obviously, there's always digging deeper to the game environments and to doing your proper study and research. But as an overall blanket or umbrella of just the process in general, your course was very instrumental, along with the history of me playing in FanDuel contests to have a successful year last year. Doesn't mean it's going to equate to this year, I know, but I'm feeling pretty confident. Should be a lot of fun going in. And this contest that we are looking at is a contest that I played pretty religiously almost every week last year, except for maybe a week or two that I didn't play. I know JM talks about maybe sometimes it's good to take a week, just kind of mentally refresh yourself. But this contest is a $30K in total prizes. It's a 5-entry max, so you can make up to 5 teams. It's $65 a team. There's 524 entrants. That's not the same amount every week. Sometimes it'll be like 400 something, sometimes maybe up to 600, but it's pretty much around what the entrant level is that you see on the screen. And those are the, playing for first place. Obviously the first place is $4,000, but the structure isn't too bad going down the list here. If you're doing 5 teams maximum a week, pretty much you get 2 teams at least in the money. You're not like killing yourself in this kind of tournament. But again, it's all relative to what you have to spend. There is another version of this contest that's $7 a team, and it's also a 5-entry max. And for some reason, I just feel really comfortable with 5 entries. It kind of, because you have the feature when you're in single entry where you have to narrow it down, and it's kind of in hindsight, you're like, oh, I wish I would have had just a little bit extra or something. With 5-entry max, it kind of covers everything I want to kind of close in on by the end of the week. And then kind of, in my opinion, leave no stone unturned and not really feel any kind of regret if you did have a good week. At least you kind of, with 5 teams, even 3 to a certain extent, you kind of cover a lot of territory that you're trying to encapsulate in your roster construction for these teams.
Yeah, it gives you some flexibility, but it also provides like a constraint. Sometimes I've got a 3-year-old daughter. You can see her drawings in the background at my daddy daycare here. But routine and constraints are a good thing for all of us. And I think I think that you're exactly right. That 5-entry max is a pretty cool number, because 1 or 3, it kind of limits you like in what your opportunities can do. But then a lot of times after that, you have like the 20 max or the big ones. This 5-entry I think is really, really cool, because you can take a stand but still have some flexibility. In this structure, just looking at this structure, there's 131 teams get paid. That is 25% of the entries. So, just from a standpoint of you're entering 5 entries, assuming you max this, that is what, $325.
Right.
So, $325, but just by, mathematically, you have 5 entries, so you would expect one of those to be in the top 20%. So that's a min cash, and that's 150 of your dollars back just by kind of being somewhat expected over time. Which again, I talk about some of that in like my expected value course and stuff like that. But there is, contest selection is just so overlooked by so many people. Even the min cash being over 2x what your entry fee for one entry is a big deal. You look at the Millie Maker and stuff like that. A lot of times it's barely 1.5x. So, those types of things over time really add up. So I really like this contest structure that you've got here. And I know you said you had a lot of success with this last year. Do you want to tell the people some of your finishes there?
Yeah, I had 4 really solid weeks. I finished 3rd place one week. I was in the top 5 2 other weeks, and then like top 10 on another week. And it's interesting because I know we're going to get into it, but the late swap feature, I absolutely love with this contest, especially with game environments that happen to be in the late window that you want to have have access or be able to put those game environments into play. One week, my late swap decision cost me a 1st place. And then another week, my late swap decision, which is typically the flex spot, I like to think is one of the 2 or 3 late swap, potentials. And then one week it helped me get, better on the placement than I otherwise would have.
Right.
So that's something I definitely want to get your thoughts about on the late swap situation. That, a lot of people still seems like they may know about it, but maybe don't utilize it especially when it gets closer to when the second slate or the late slate of games is kicking off. But yeah, I had about 4 solid weeks in this contest last year. It's funny, the third place finish I was in first place. It was the week where the Broncos were playing the Raiders and it went to overtime, and Davante Adams had that big 50-yard plus touchdown. And it's funny because my late swap decision that week, I had Tony Pollard and I had T. Higgins going. Those were like my 2 spots I kind of left for late play.
Yeah.
And they're the reason I got to first place. Tony Pollard was in that game against the Vikings where the Cowboys were just crushing. But that Davante Adams knocked 2 people ahead of me from first to third. And I was like, please let the game end.
Yeah.
And not go into overtime. But
mine was not as severe, but something similar, because that was the week that Zeke came back and Pollard had been smashing, and that everybody kind of got off of him. So he was like 5% owned.
Absolutely.
And he was like my top play for the week. I was like, don't get off of him. He's going to go nuts. And he did. I wasn't quite up in like first place in any contest, but it didn't quite go. Dallas ended up winning by too much, because I built a lot around that game. And then, the Minnesota side just kind of fell on its face, but I digress. We'll have a different DFS Labs for counseling for all our grieving and losses.
I could use that.
But yeah, we'll touch on the late swap stuff as we get into the breakdown. So I'm going to pull up your lineup then, and then you can kind of talk us through it. You could talk through the, tell us the players, and then kind of your thought process as you were building your lineup. So I'll pull that up now.
Okay. So obviously this is the practice lineup. I was looking at and obviously reading some of the OWS write-ups in the NFL Edge. And you can't see it on the screen at the moment, but I actually have $1,200 left over on this team. And that's only for the reason of late swap, really, with the 4 o'clock games. Because I definitely, at least on the face of it right now, the 2 game environments, especially with FanDuel, at least in my opinion right now, I want exposure to is the Dolphins at the Chargers and the Eagles at the Patriots. Those 2 games I feel are, especially one of them, could definitely take off. But so I started with, and the mindset was kind of like making sure that I had allocation for those late games. So I figured, and a lot of this I can almost correlate with your course too, with your FanDuel course. So Anthony Richardson, obviously there's a risk factor there, but he does kind of fit the model of a rushing quarterback with upside. Completely unpredictable how he's going to do in week 1, but I figured Jacksonville is definitely capable of putting up points. I think either or, even in a play from behind role with the rushing upside and the price 6,700, pretty good price to be able to kind of work other areas of the team. And as you can see a little bit down, it shows it. I haven't paired with Alec Pierce. I figure with the rushing quarterback, one player probably could be naked if I wanted to go that route, but Alec Pierce is kind of more of a deep threat, not really a slot guy, I don't think so. And he's also a pretty nice price there.
Yeah, and I like that, and I think you're right with. Sorry to jump in, but as you're talking, and I think that specifically, every situation is unique, and I think that Richardson at his price point and Pierce at his price point, it makes sense, right? Pierce is, he's kind of a deep threat guy. Richardson, he's got a big arm. I talked about it in my team previews this year about how Richardson, I think he's the type of guy who his physical tools are so elite that people are going to want to jump on him in like down matchups. But I think he's really interesting because he's physically so gifted. He can beat anybody. You know what I mean? Like he can break 2 tackles from any, he's Derrick Henry, but a tenth of a second faster. in the 40. Like physically, that he's the same size as Derrick Henry. And then he can throw it 60 yards. So I love him. And then with those rushing quarterbacks, a lot of times you're hoping for that rushing yardage. You're hoping for the rushing touchdowns. Pierce is cheap enough that it makes sense. If Richardson if you've got a quarterback like this and you're pairing them with an $8,000 receiver, then it's a little tougher needle to thread. But, and even Pierce, he doesn't necessarily kill you in a contest like this, even if he just has like a 5 for 60 game. So I love that pairing to start it out.
Okay. And another thing something that I'll bounce off that JM stresses, and that is that price point for Anthony Richardson probably isn't going to stay at that price for too long, especially if he does well. So it's kind of good to get him in at least on FanDuel at a price point like that, because inevitably he's going to be a lot more expensive than that sooner than later, in my opinion. But okay, and then we have for the running backs, Rachaad White and Austin Ekeler. As far as Rashad White goes, this is another game that could be a shootout situation. I don't really feel he doesn't have much behind him to deal with right now. I feel that he will be definitely, besides rushing, the pass catching running back, 3 down per se. I mean, maybe some of the time. And also at that same price point at 6,400, I'm also thinking about Brian Robinson, same price point as Rachaad White. At home against the Cardinals, he should have a pretty good workload. I know he's splitting, and that's the other factor why I went with Rachaad White. He's going to be splitting somewhat with Antonio Gibson. I think Rachaad White, at least in week 1, seemingly will have the backfield mostly to himself. And then Austin Ekeler obviously is for that game environment that I'm interested in for the 4 o'clock games. But he also is somebody that is late swappable. Maybe I want to go off him to somebody like Kenneth Walker, and then instead in the flex, which we'll get to, put Tyreek Hill in there maybe. So it gives me the Rachaad White price is also, I feel, a really good price for week 1 based on what his volume should be in the Tampa Bay offense and at Minnesota. They should be putting up points. And obviously right underneath him is Justin Jefferson. The one Viking rule, I guess I'm implementing here for week 1 that JM likes to talk about historically since in the Kirk Cousin era. And so JJ kind of goes without saying. Just so happens I'm able to fit him in this particular lineup, and I don't seem on the face of it to be losing too much of other things by having him, even though that's obviously an expensive price point there. Mm-hmm. And I'll give it back to you at this point if you want to.
Yeah. I like all of the thought processes, the Jefferson and White, that mini correlation. I know Hilo's already been like blowing up our phones. I'm still doing like all these best ball drafts, and Hilo's just like pinging us left and right about his Baker Mayfield, Rashad White stacks. So I'm excited to see that. But I do think, White is a guy who throughout the course of the season, I'm not sure how that situation plays out. But for week 1, he certainly looks like the guy. Minnesota's defense shouldn't be that great. Jefferson is, again, this is the contest. You got to understand the contest you're playing. There's so much value week 1, kind of across the board. It's easy to find salary that, finding a way to get Jefferson in your lineup. You can afford him, I guess, is where I'm going with it. You can afford to pay up a little bit for him. So yeah, I love that correlation. I think that's kind of an underrated game just because there's kind of some stink around Tampa from the offseason narratives, losing Brady. Love Austin Ekeler. I'm never gonna talk down on that. You didn't dive too much into him yet, did you? Or you just
No, because he's more of I have him in place for now, but unbelievably, to your point of having that much salary remaining, that's a week 1 only probably situation. Yeah, that's a benefit. And I'll cover him more within the late swap mindset that I
Yeah.
have for particular
And
team.
then you want to talk about the rest, the bottom of the lineup here?
Yeah, so Chris Olave, you could consider a onesie. I think, he seems to be, set up to have a potential big year. Big play guy. As your teachings on FanDuel, I mean, you're looking for people who can realistically, you can see getting 2 touchdowns in a game. And at home against Tennessee, obviously Tennessee, even though that could be deceiving, that 32nd rank from last year. But, I think he's going to command a lot of volume and focus. Sometimes, it's good to think about players where separate from DraftKings, you're not really necessarily looking for like a slot receiver who's going to get a lot of volume and catches. You're looking for somebody who can take the top off, but who's also one of the main focuses of that team's operation from the coaching scheme. And I feel Olave is going to be like a big part of the Saints offense, even starting week 1. I like his price as well at 7,300. And then looking down at the tight end spot, I know a lot of people probably, have had frustrating results with Mike Gesicki over the years when he was a Dolphin, but New England, historically, they use their tight ends, really well schematically. There was some injury news on him, but I guess it looks like he's good to go. And at 4,800, I think I'm implementing the cheap tight end that at least is athletic and, that can be involved in the offense, maybe in a catch-up game against Philadelphia. There isn't any Eagles on this team, but that's the other reason, for late swap purposes. At least I have a piece of that game through Gesicki. And if we scroll a little bit further down, I have Raheem Mostert as well. That's kind of a skinny stack to Ekeler at only 5,900. Obviously, Jeff Wilson is injured. And I think behind him is just a rookie running back for the Dolphins. So I think Mostert, at least in week 1, the Miami backfield will not be quite as muddled, and he'll definitely get his fair share of work. And then the Broncos defense at 4,000. I know defenses price-wise on FanDuel don't necessarily matter as much as DraftKings as far as the minimum to the maximum defensive rate to put a defense on your team. But I do like the Broncos in this spot against the Raiders. Josh Jacobs, he didn't have any training camp really. They're going to be in high altitude and hot weather. It'll be interesting to see what the stamina is like on the Raiders side of the ball as it gets further into the game. And the Broncos seem to fit there for me defensively. But then I have $1,200 left over. So, there's a lot of, depending on how the 1 o'clock players are doing, there's a lot of wiggle room between Ekeler, Raheem Mostert, and even Gesicki to maybe mix it up a little bit if I'm, looking at ownership, although ownership maybe not as much of a factor in this small of a contest, but somewhat of a factor probably. Maybe I want to kind of do a piece on the Eagles. This kind of affords me kind of going any direction. Like if I take Ekeler out, for instance, you can put somebody like Kenneth Walker in maybe, and then that frees you up in the flex for either Tyreek Hill or A.J. Brown or players like this. So there's a lot of wiggle room, at least in week 1 here.
Sorry, who did you say for Ekeler?
Yeah, just
who did you say?
Or theoretically, so if you took Ekeler out as an example and you put in Kenneth Walker.
Okay, yeah, I got you. I didn't hear the name. Gotcha, yeah.
No problem.
And then Tyreek for most.
I think Kenneth Walker's 71.
Yep.
Or
so
73.
yeah. So I love where your head is at with all of this. So you've got the Broncos. So, just like my feedback and kind of looking at kind of how I see the week and how I, week 1, the really interesting thing with week 1 is obviously pricing is a little off. They're trying, it's intentional by the sites. They want it a little softer so people can build lineups that they like. But there's so many things that are off. There's so many things that if you can be ahead on, if you can be right, like this is the best time to find those inefficiencies in the market because 4 or 5 weeks in, you have all the usage rates, you've adjusted to the offenses, that sort of stuff. So like when I look at your lineup, the number one thing to me that stands out is if we look at defense. So we talked about you've got the Broncos 4,000. And I don't think that's a bad play at all, but looking at your salary left over, because I do like the rest of the lineup. I think the Washington Commanders, there's so much noise about the Cardinals this year and Kyler Murray and their awkward coach giving that speech and all there's so much negativity around the Cardinals that I think the Commanders I would expect to be the highest owned defense this week. And with that in mind, I really like the idea of the Ravens defense. So going up and paying for them. Along with that, I'm really high on J.K. Dobbins, who, if we go back to the running back, he's only $100 more than Rashad White. So the thing I like about him, and again, he's right priced by Brian Robinson, who I think people, he's kind of got that early down and goal line type role is what the word is. So with people being down on Arizona, also on the defense, I think playing Dobbins with the Ravens defense, because I think the Ravens are going to be really, really good this year. I think they're going to put up a ton of points week one. And I think Dobbins is going to be the feature back that we've never seen him be before, just because I'm so down on the rest of that backfield. And we talk about, I like the correlation play with White and Jefferson, but also like there's theories where Jefferson just has a really good game and it doesn't guarantee anything for White. And there's also situations where I think the touchdown equity that you're looking at from Tampa Bay versus Baltimore is a big swing. So at the same price point with two backs that have kind of the same projection as far as like likely going to be on the field 70 to 75% of the time. Again, this is getting into the weeds on like the player take like stuff, but the Ravens, right? They just paid Lamar Jackson like a ton of money. They committed to him long-term with this giant contract. And so one of my things this year is like, you're not going to, and he's not like the Josh Allen build, right? He's not Jalen Hurts. He's more of a thin frame. So I just think that especially in games like this, where we should kind of expect them to be in control, I don't think Lamar is going to siphon off as much rushing work, especially near the goal line. So yeah, I just think Dobbins, that's like the first like adjustment that I see that would make sense. It's your lineup, do what you want. But that, like, I love how you built this lineup. I also love that you built it with that money remaining, because so obviously you've got me kind of looking this over and giving you some feedback. But I also think that's a good exercise for anyone building lineups to do, would be to build a lineup that you feel good about, leave yourself some salary, and then a day or two later, you can come back when you have a better handle on the slate, when maybe you have more news and information, and be like, oh, this is, because I think everybody just naturally wants to build, the full lineup, and they spend all their money right away. And then it's looking for small adjustments. Whereas, when you start and you've got that cushion, your mind just has a lot more possibilities. There's a lot more, it allows your brain to go in different directions instead of just these sideways paths. So I think that's like an interesting way to build. Like I said, I love how you built the rest of this roster. I love the late swap discussion. I love where your head's at too, with like the biggest thing I would say with late swap, and the biggest mistake people make is they go to late swap and they're trying to figure it out at, midway through the fourth quarter of the early games. And they're trying to figure out, what can I do here? What can I do there? I love that. Well, so you have 4 players in the late window. If you keep the Broncos, you'd have 3 if you made the swap that I talked about. But I love that having like 3 or 4, 2 to 4 guys, 3 kind of optimal, because it gives you flexibility where I can go up here, I can go down here, and those guys are at varying price points. To your point, if you go down off Ekeler, you can go up from Mostert. You look at Gesicki is 4,800. So with him in the tight end spot, it's you've got some guys in the late window. You got Everett for 700 more. You've got Higbee if Cooper Kupp is out, Dulcich if Judy is out. You get a lot of options there. Dallas Goedert. So I think that and we'll dive more and more into late swap throughout the season as we do these weekly. But I think it's such an underutilized thing, and it's especially useful in this specific type of contest because you can see where you stand a lot better. When there's 10,000 entries, yeah, you can scroll through and kind of, okay, this guy's ahead of me, but you don't know who's behind you, especially in big weeks like this. There's 13 games and there's 5 games in the afternoon window. You can think you're sitting great and you got, 2 or 3 guys left. But when there's, 20,000 entries or 100,000 entries, there's people who have only had 2 or 3 guys play. And if one of the games in the afternoon goes, is 45-42, you're probably going to get lapped by a bunch of people. It's not going to matter. Whereas here, you can have such a good idea where you stand. And I think it's really relevant from the standpoint of trying to get to first. So seeing your paths there, you've got some time where you can figure out who, if you're sitting really well, who are the few guys around you? What do they have left?
Yeah.
What salary do they have left? And kind of, okay, this is probably what they've got, what they're working with based on how the rest of their lineup looks. So there's just so much game theory you can get into. And I think it's just especially useful in this type of contest. And I think it's the other thing that I think people don't do enough of is, and that again, why I love this type of contest where you've got 5 entries, is it's useful for that entry where you have 5 or 6 guys in the early game and you're sitting really good, right? But it's also useful when you have 3 or 4 guys in the early game and maybe you're not doing good and you can save some EV. Like, you're not going to win the tournament, but you might be able to like change this lineup up to something you never would have made before the contest started. But you can take some weird stands, play some contrarian lineups, and if things break right, maybe you save some money by getting them in cash. And I think that, if you're entering 40 lineups in a contest, in a huge contest, it's like impossible. You're not going to go through every dead lineup and save that money. So especially useful in this type of contest, I think.
Yeah, and all great points on the on your opinions on the player change-ups. But the beauty of those player change-ups is I don't necessarily have to, because they can be on another team. I have 5 teams to make if I'm going to max enter.
Right.
So it's great to get your feedback for another team, or maybe it's a similar setup, but then I make a couple tweaks and have that as another team of the 5. So yeah, no, thanks for sharing your a little bit, maybe slight adjustments here and there on a few of the other game environments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, every lineup is unique and tells a story. And, I shared a couple, player team specific takes, but I'm going to be wrong on some things, just like everybody else week 1. It's just,
Me too.
trying to paint a picture of something that, maybe everybody else isn't expecting, especially week 1 when we really do know so little. Being able to take, I love that you took Gesicki. He's a guy I've been loading up on in best ball the last 2 weeks because
I can see
he's
that.
actually returned to practice, but they've just been conserving him. But he's back and he's going to play in full. And their receiving core is pretty beat up. The Eagles, they build their team. They don't really value off-ball linebackers. So he's gonna have some good matchups, and I think he's gonna get targets. So in a potential high-scoring game playing from behind, I love that play. But yeah, I think now you got me all excited. I'm gonna go start my builds because.
And one of my other teams would definitely have probably a Jalen Hurts team with AJ or Devontae with maybe a Gesicki run back. I mean, again, that's the beauty of this contest. To your point on a couple points you made is you can keep track a little bit better with people who you're in competition with throughout the course of the day. It's because of the entrance and the way it's set up, it kind of assists that playing for first place mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I can, with 5 teams, leave no stone unturned on, because I think that game environment is also, you got to have exposure, I think, to a Jalen Hurts team. At least stack him with Devontae or AJ, and then maybe a Gesicki run back, and then maybe even pair that with the Chargers Dolphins, where I guess it's more of a heavy 4 o'clock team that way.
Yeah.
That's one question I had for you. Does it really, because it's a case-by-case basis by each week where the better game environments potentially could be. But is there a detriment or a benefit to being balanced on your 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock players? Or if it's just, look, if you're feeling that, the game environments favor the late window and most of your team's going to be comprised of that, I guess you have less of a late swap feature in that situation.
Yeah, I think it's basically at the end of the day, the points all count the same, and a lot of lineups even some that I look at, I end up not changing anything. So I think it's suboptimal to build lineups, to build your initial lineup specifically thinking I need to late swap. I think you build the lineup, you see where it stands, you see the flexibility it gives you. And then you kind of have a plan of, okay, like you talked about, well, I would swap Ekeler and Mostert to Kenneth Walker and Tyreek.
Yeah, maybe.
Having that idea of knowing what your change is going to be if you need to go there or if you want to go there, depending on how the early things go. I don't think that and just from a standpoint, 2 years ago on FanDuel, it was in the bomb, the $55 tournament. I took 5th, and it was I late swapped. I had 6 guys going late, and I late swapped 3 guys for 3 different guys. I won't get into the whole thing. We're kind of running out of time here. But it was, once you get to a certain point, once you get if you have 5, 6 guys in that late window, then it's more you're looking for, did those 2 or 3 guys that you had going, did they do well? And then are you sure that this lineup, for me, this is how I think about it. I go back through that lineup that's sitting really good. And because when I initially built the lineups, I was thinking, like you're saying, trying to cover these different scenarios or, different ideas.
Right.
But now I have this one lineup that the 3 dudes hit in the early window and I got 6 guys left. Am I sure that this is the optimal 6 that I want?
It'd be like,
I have a couple in there that I just have in this lineup because I was trying to cover another side of a scenario. So it's ooh, wait, I have, Mike Evans because I'm trying to cover the other side of this Tampa scenario, but I really like Chris Godwin more this week. Well, Godwin's in my lineups that are dead. So do I want to get this Mike Evans exposure here when I don't like him as much? It's that sort of idea. again, where, the NFL Sunday, it's dynamic. It's very dynamic. And there's a lot that you can exploit, and, your thought process and mindset has to adjust, because things are changing as the games play out. So, yeah, super interesting though. I have had a terrific time. I'm all jacked up. Excited to do this weekly, at least once a week going forward.
Absolutely.
Excited to see you in the 1 week season Binks channel on Sunday with your Anthony Richardson stack. If Anthony Richardson is leading teams to the top of the leaderboards, I'll probably at least be breaking even. So, should be good. Thank you for being with us, Steve. Thank you to the audience for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Sounds good. Good luck, everybody.